November 25th, 1991, Granite Bay, California, a quiet suburb just outside Sacramento. Cindy Wanner, 35 years old, arrives at her sister's home with her two children, a 4-year-old daughter and an 11-month-old baby. She is there to clean the house, a normal errand, the kind of thing millions of people do every single week. Hours later, Cindy's husband arrives to pick up the family. The 4-year-old is there. The 11-month-old is there, strapped in a high chair, crying, alone. Cindy's shoes are still inside the house, her coat, her car in the driveway. Everything she came with, still there. Cindy is gone. She had been taken so suddenly, so completely, that she did not have time to pick up her shoes, did not have time to grab her coat, did not have time to take her baby out of the high chair. 3 weeks later, her body is found in a remote wooded area near Forest Hill, California, 40 miles from where she was taken. Investigators determined she had been kept alive for some time before she was raped and strangled. For 34 years, the man who did this was never caught. He changed his name, built a new life, lived freely in Arizona while Cindy's daughters grew up without a mother, and while investigators submitted piece after piece of evidence to forensic labs, searching for a match that never came, until it did. And when they finally found him, what they found in his house told them everything about the kind of man they had been looking for all along. This is the Cindy Wanner case, and it is one of the most disturbing things I have ever put on this channel. Before we go any further, I want to tell you who Cindy Wanner was, because she deserves more than a case number, more than a news headline from 1991 that most people have already forgotten. Cindy Wanner was 35 years old. She was a wife and a mother of two. She lived in the Sacramento area with her family, a normal, ordinary life in one of California's quiet suburbs. By all accounts from the people who knew her, she was present, caring, and devoted to her children. On the day she disappeared, she had brought both of her children with her to help clean her sister's home. She was not doing anything extraordinary. She was not in a dangerous place. She was not in an unfamiliar neighborhood. She was at a family member's house doing a favor with her babies nearby. And that, the absolute ordinariness of it, is what makes this case so deeply unsettling. Cindy Wanner was not in the wrong place at the wrong time in the way that phrase is usually meant. She was exactly where any of us might be on any given Tuesday, and a man who had no business being free walked into that ordinary day and destroyed it. Her daughters grew up without her, her husband lost his wife, her parents buried their child, and for 34 years, her family had no answers, no justice, and no closure. That changes now. But first, let me tell you about the man investigators believe is responsible, because his history is something that every person watching this video needs to hear. James Lawhead Jr. was 30 years old in 1991. He was also a convicted sex offender. In 1980, he had been sentenced to 19 years in prison for sex crimes committed against a young child. A child. He received 19 years. He served 11. In early 1991, James Lawhead Jr. was released from California State Prison. 10 months later, Cindy Wanner was abducted from her sister's home in Granite Bay. Let that sink in. A man convicted of sexually abusing a child was released after serving just 11 years of a 19-year sentence. And within 10 months of walking out of prison, investigators say he kidnapped a 35-year-old mother, held her captive, raped her, and strangled her to death. He did not change. He did not become a different person. The system released him, handed the community no meaningful warning, and within less than a year, a woman was dead. This is not a peripheral detail in the Cindy Wanner story. It is the central one. Because the question that her case forces us to ask is not just, how did this man evade justice for 34 years? The question is, why was he free to commit this crime in the first place? Cindy Wanner did not die because investigators failed to catch a killer. She died in the first instance because a system designed to protect the public released a dangerous predator and then failed to monitor him effectively. And what happened next, after the murder, is almost as disturbing as the crime itself. When Cindy Wanner's body was found in the wooded area near Forest Hill 3 weeks after her disappearance, investigators from the Placer County Sheriff's Office launched what would become one of the longest-running murder investigations in the county's history. The physical evidence was clear. Cindy had been abducted from the Granite Bay home. She had been transported on a live across 40 miles of California terrain. She had been held, and she had been killed. The question was who? For years, detectives worked every lead. Evidence was collected, logged, and submitted for testing. But the forensic technology of the early 1990s had significant limitations. Sample after sample was submitted to labs. Year after year, no usable match came back. James Lawhead was on the radar. As a convicted sex offender released earlier that year, he was a natural person of interest in a case involving a kidnapping and sexual assault. But connecting a suspect to a crime requires evidence, and the evidence that existed could not, at that time, be definitively matched. Lawhead was later arrested for failing to register as a sex offender in Placer County, a requirement for convicted sex offenders in California. He was arrested again in 2005 on an outstanding weapons charge in Lincoln, California, but before he could be brought to trial on that charge, he disappeared, not figuratively, literally. Law enforcement had no documented record of James Lawhead Jr.'s whereabouts after 2005. He was not in California. He was not in any database they could find. He had not left a paper trail that investigators could follow. He had simply vanished. Sheriff Wayne Wu described the investigative challenge directly. We explored all possibilities on what could have happened, whether he was still living under a fake identity, whether he had left the country, or whether he was even deceased. For 20 years, nobody knew. But the Placer County Sheriff's cold case investigation team never stopped. They kept the case active. They kept resubmitting evidence as new forensic technologies became available. And eventually, one final submission changed everything. In 2025, 34 years after Cindy Wanner's murder, the Placer County Sheriff's Office made one final submission. A piece of evidence from the original 1991 investigation, one that had been tested and retested over the decades without a usable result, was submitted to the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office Forensic Laboratory. That lab had access to advanced DNA analysis techniques that had not been available in any of the previous submissions. The result came back: a match. James Lawhead Jr. After 34 years, the science had finally caught up with the crime. Evidence that had been sitting in an evidence locker since 1991, waiting for the technology to exist that could process it, had delivered the answer that investigators had spent their careers searching for. Now investigators had a name confirmed by DNA. What they did not have was a location. Lawhead had been gone since 2005. No documented address, no tax records, no phone registered in his name, no bank accounts. For 20 years, he had existed in the United States and left almost no trace. Investigators reached out to law enforcement agencies across Arizona and other states, sharing what they knew and asking for help. They believed Lawhead had assumed a completely new identity. They just did not know where to look. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. The Scottsdale Police Department, using Arizona's Department of Transportation facial recognition system, ran a comparison. There was a match. A man named Vincent Reynolds, living in Bullhead City, Arizona, a small city near the Nevada border, nearly 600 miles from Placer County, matched the facial profile of James Lawhead Jr. Detectives moved quickly. On April 24, 2026, officers arrived at a residential address in Bullhead City. James Lawhead Jr., or Vincent Reynolds as his neighbors knew him, was arrested on the driveway of his home. Inside the house, loaded firearms, a burner phone, and $15,000 in cash. The profile of a man who had spent 20 years ready to run and never quite had to, until now. When investigators traced James Lawhead to Bullhead City, Arizona, they discovered something that added a devastating new dimension to the case. The house where Lawhead had been living, the house where Vincent Reynolds had been quietly residing for years, was not his. It was owned by his sister, 71-year-old Terry Lawhead Steele. And here is what makes that fact so significant. Over the course of 34 years, Terry Lawhead Steele had spoken with law enforcement multiple times about her brother's whereabouts, including, investigators said, just weeks before the arrest. Each time, she told them she had not heard from her brother in more than 20 years. Each time, she claimed to have no knowledge of where he was. She was not telling the truth. Evidence gathered by investigators showed that Terry Lawhead Steele had remained in regular communication with her brother throughout the years he was living under his assumed identity. She knew where he was. She owned the home he was hiding in. And for decades, she looked law enforcement in the face and said she did not know. On April 24, 2026, the same day her brother was arrested in Arizona, Terry Lawhead Steele was arrested in South Carolina on an accessory charge. She is 71 years old. She has known for 34 years that her brother allegedly kidnapped, raped, and murdered a 35-year-old mother of two. She has known that Cindy Wanner's daughters grew up without their mother. She has known that a family has been in agony for over 3 decades, and she chose her brother. I want to ask you something, and I genuinely want you to answer in the comments. Could you do that? If you discovered that a family member had done something this horrific, could you spend 34 years protecting them, lying to police, owning the house they were hiding in? I think most of us want to believe we could not. But the fact that Terry Lawhead Steele did, for 34 years, consistently without breaking, tells us something important about the nature of family loyalty and what it can be used to protect. When the Placer County Sheriff's Office announced James Lawhead's arrest, they included a statement that most news outlets reported briefly and then moved on from. But it is a statement that Cindy Wanner's family, and every family on the West Coast with an unsolved case, needs to hear. Detectives are now exploring the possibility that James Lawhead Jr. could be responsible for additional crimes. We encourage law enforcement agencies, specifically those across the West Coast, to look at any cold cases that may have similarities to this case. Read that again. The Placer County Sheriff's Office is publicly calling on other law enforcement agencies to compare their cold cases against Lawhead's DNA and profile. They are saying in official language that they believe Cindy Wanner may not be his only victim. Think about what that means. James Lawhead Jr. was released from prison in early 1991. Cindy Wanner was murdered in November of that same year. He then lived freely, under an assumed identity with no documented record, for 20 years, across multiple states, moving apparently without restriction. What happened during those 20 years? Right now, across California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Arizona, there are cold case detectives reviewing their files, looking for a kidnapping, a rape, a murder of a woman in her 30s. Any case with characteristics that match what happened to Cindy Wanner. There may be families out there right now who do not yet know that the man responsible for what happened to their loved one has just been arrested in Arizona. The Cindy Wanner case may be just the beginning of what James Lawhead Jr. has to answer for. Cindy Wanner was 35 years old. She went to clean her sister's house on a Tuesday morning in November 1991. She brought her children with her. She left her baby in a high chair. She never got to take her baby out of that high chair herself. Her daughters grew up without a mother. Her husband lost his wife. And for 34 years, the man responsible lived freely under someone else's name, in someone else's house, protected by someone who knew exactly what he had done. James Lawhead Jr. is now in custody in Placer County, California. He faces charges of murder and kidnapping, with 2 special circumstances: murder during the commission of a rape and murder during the commission of a kidnapping. 34 years, advanced DNA analysis, facial recognition technology, and a cold case team that never gave up. Placer County District Attorney Morgan Geyer said it best. This arrest is a powerful reminder that time does not erase responsibility, and it does not diminish our commitment. Cold cases are not forgotten cases. They remain urgent, they remain personal, and they remain a promise we intend to keep. They kept that promise for Cindy Wanner, 34 years later, but they kept it. If this story hits you, hit the like button. It costs nothing, and it means more people find Cindy's story. She and her family deserve that. Subscribe to Paradigm Exposed. New case every week and drop a comment below. 2 questions. Could you protect a family member who did something like this? And do you think there are more victims? I read every single comment on this channel. Next week, another case, another family, another story that deserves more attention than it got. This is Paradigm Exposed.